So the theme of tonight's show is tradition, stories about the way things are done. And in my experience, sometimes things that you do one way are done a little bit differently when you go somewhere else. For example, I spent the first semester of my senior year in college studying abroad in France, in a town called Tours in the Loire Valley. I thought this would be a great chance for me to try out my 8 years of classroom French and also experience living in an environment that was different from the Midwestern state I had grown up in. But once I got there, I realized that other than the language and the history and the architecture, they had the same stuff in France that we did back home in Ohio. Only, as that immortal world traveler Vincent Vega pointed out, it was the little differences. For example, you could go to McDonald's and you could have a glass of wine with your Royale with cheese. Yeah. And you only had to be 18 to do that. You didn't have to be 21 like you did in Ohio. And yogurt was something you drank from a bottle instead of eating with a spoon. And even stuff like office supplies were a little bit different. Standard French notebook paper doesn't have lines on it. It has grids like graph paper. How bizarre is that? And even holidays were kind of the same, but kind of different. The American students who were in my university group were a little disappointed when we learned that Halloween wasn't celebrated over in France, at least not the way we celebrate it here. But on the other hand, the next day, November 1st, is Toussaint, or All Saints' Day. And that was celebrated with a long weekend. And a week and a half after that, it was Armistice Day and another long weekend. So that was our cue to bust out our Eurail passes and go on a couple of road trips to nearby countries so we could experience different cultures and, more importantly, get more stamps in our passports. But when Thanksgiving rolled around, in France, it was just another Thursday. Back home, they were watching the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade and getting ready for that traditional turkey dinner. But in France, we American students were expected to show up for class as usual, going to school on Thanksgiving Day. This was by far the biggest cultural shock we had experienced so far on our trip. But our translation teacher, Madame Fontaine, took pity on us, and she sugarcoated that day's lesson by having us translate Art Buchwald's famous Thanksgiving Day column. I guess if you're familiar with it. And if you're not familiar with it, you should totally Google it, but not now. In this column, Art Buchwald explains Thanksgiving to the French. And he says it's the only time of the year, actually I think this is less true today than it was when he first wrote it, but he said it's the only time of the year when Americans eat better than the French do. And as it happened, we American students got our Thanksgiving dinner after all. The local Chamber of Commerce and a Franco-American cultural organization called France États-Unis hosted a Thanksgiving dinner at one of the local wine caves for us. Yes, I said wine cave. And they did a pretty good job. I mean, the tables had the appropriate holiday-themed decorations on them. And at each place setting, there was a little menu card that promised all of the traditional Thanksgiving dishes. There was dinde rôtie, roast turkey, haricots verts, green beans, and there were even patates douces, sweet potatoes. And there was one more item on that menu that was unfamiliar to us American students, but we embraced it immediately. It was vin à discrétion. All the wine you can drink. And we were about on our second glass of vin à discrétion when the food arrived. And as we had come to expect in our time in France, things were pretty much the same as they were back home, but there were little differences. The turkey wasn't whole bird. It was turkey roll. So that was okay. There weren't any dinner rolls, but there was sliced baguette. And that was fine with me, I love baguette. And the sweet potatoes were missing altogether. but everyone had on their plate a little heap of French fries. Whatever. Our French hosts were kind enough to put on a traditional Thanksgiving dinner for us. And hey, if you didn't like the food, you could always have more vin à discrétion. So eventually, someone sampled a French fry. Oh, these taste weird. Someone else tried one. Oh man, the kitchen messed up. They put sugar on the fries instead of salt. We had a good drunken laugh over that and a little more vin à discrétion. Until one of us, someone who had had a little less vin à discrétion than the rest of us, consulted the menu and did the math. Guys, I don't think that the sugar was a mistake. I think these are supposed to be the patate douce, the sweet potatoes. So we had another drunken laugh over that and a little more vin à discrétion, and we went with it. And funky French fries aside, it was a lovely dinner and a lovely evening and a very memorable Thanksgiving. And the next morning, we American students added yet another French phrase to our growing vocabularies. Gueule de bois. Translation, hangover.